What inspired you to like be in politics, period?
Well, actually, I'm glad you asked that question because I brought this for you teacher today. I'll leave this with you. I've written a bunch of books. This is one of the books I wrote, and I'll answer your question this way. This is not a promotion for the book. This book is old. Right? But this is a picture. You can all see it at the top of a politician. His name was Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy. He was President John F. Kennedy's younger brother. And this was taken in the year 1968 in my hometown, about an hour and a half from here in the San Joaquin Valley, a town called Turlock. Bobby Kennedy was a United States Senator. He's the younger brother of President Kennedy who was assassinated. He was running for president. And he would have been nominated to be president because he won the California primary that year. My parents, like I mentioned to you, were immigrants to this country. And one of the reasons my father came here as a teacher was you could vote, it was free. You know, this was a free country. You could actually say what you thought without going to being put in jail or something like that. Right? And so he immediately started, even before he was a citizen, you were asking about that, he got involved in politics. And out in the San Joaquin Valley where we lived, in a small town called Turlock, there were probably like 8 Democrats out there. Everybody else was a Republican. It was a very conservative place. So when Bobby Kennedy's people were organizing a train ride to get publicity for his campaign in 1968, he had a group of people, they call it an advance team. They go to a city before the train gets there to try and drum up support, right? And they said, do we have any elected officials who are Democrats here? And they said, no. And they said, well, do you have any famous people who are Democrats? And they went, no. And they said, anybody? And they said, well, there's this guy, he's a professor, he's a geologist, that was my dad, and a physicist. And they said, whenever there's an earthquake, he's the guy the radio station calls, and he says, it's a 2.0, go back to bed. Right? And so they said, they were desperate, they said, fine, we'll take him. He'd been on the radio. So my father got to ride on the train with Bobby Kennedy, and when Kennedy came to town, my younger brother and I went to the train station, and we knew that there were no Democrats in Turlock, so we thought there'd be the 3 of us there to meet the train and say hello as the train went by. But it turned out there were about 2,000 people there. And most of them were holding up signs with the name of Kennedy's opponents. And they looked pretty angry, frankly. And I thought this was going to be a riot when I got there, and I was about 10 years old at the time. And Kennedy had gotten lots of enemies in the San Joaquin Valley because he was the first prominent politician to make an appearance with a man named Cesar Chavez. How many of you have heard of Chavez before? I would think that many of you have. Okay, good. Good, you should know. He's a very important political figure in our history. Good man. And so a lot of the ranchers out there didn't like, and the farmers didn't like the fact that Kennedy was supporting someone who was going to organize farm workers into a union. Right? You know the history of this. So Kennedy came out in the back of the train to answer your question about inspired me. And his microphone didn't work, as you can see here. Right? So he just stepped up to the back of the train and he started speaking. And eventually he took off his coat and he just spoke from his heart. And he talked about turkeys. Turkeys, you know? Turkeys, gobble, gobble, gobble. And he mentioned that he had been on the train coming down from Sacramento and they'd had eggs and sausage, and he goes, by the way, they were turkey sausage. And the crowd kind of giggled a little bit, and all the angry ranchers were up there, and they're kind of, you know, that's a stupid thing to say. Why did he say it? It was kind of funny. Why do you say it, right? And then he kept talking about the other towns they had visited, and then he mentioned that as they got close to Turlock, his wife had announced in the train car that they were having turkey sandwiches for lunch. And every time he said the word turkey, he put a little inflection in his voice, kind of like lower the tone of his voice so that the word would stand out. And again, people started laughing. And as they laughed a little bit more, I noticed some of the angry people put their signs down. Right? And so then he talked about where else they were going. They were going to take the train. My dad was going to ride them all the way to Bakersfield, right? Pretty far down south in the valley. And he said that his wife had informed him that for dinner there would be mashed potatoes, cooked carrots and peas, and of course baked turkey with stuffing. Right? And by this time the audience was loving it and they were laughing because he kept talking about turkey. Now what you don't know, that he knew, was that the major industry in that little town I lived in, Turlock, was poultry. How many of you heard of Foster Farms before? Right? Okay, well Foster Farms, before it was Foster Farms, was Val Chris Turkeys. Val Chris was Valley Christopherson. The mayor of Turlock was Mr. Christopherson, the staunch Republican who wouldn't ride with Kennedy on the train. That's why he had to look for a Democrat. Right? And how did Kennedy know all this? Well, I asked, but this bugged me because as a 10-year-old, I was just mesmerized by the fact that this guy could come give this speech, and all these angry people would suddenly put their signs down, be laughing and clapping, right? And so I waited for my dad to come back from Bakersfield, and I sat like this on the porch. And when he got home, he got out of his car, he started walking around, and I followed him around the house so close that I bumped him in the back of his head, back of his butt when he stopped. And finally said, "Why are you bothering me?" And I said, "How did he know? I have to know." And he said, "What do you mean, how did he know?" He said, "How did he know about the turkeys? How did Kennedy know about the turkeys?" This really perplexed me as a 10-year-old. I thought of it like this, right? And he said, "If I tell you, will you stop bothering me?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay." We were riding from Sacramento to Modesto, whatever it was, and we were reading a newspaper, the Modesto Bee, or the Sacramento Bee newspaper, right? And Kennedy had opened up a newspaper. My dad was sitting back in the car with him with a bunch of reporters. And he said there was a full-page ad that screamed, "Turkeys from Turlock, turkeys from Turlock," which was an unfortunate radio jingle that the turkey industry also had, at least out of Sweden, right? And Kennedy kind of laughed. He's from Massachusetts, and says, "What's this?" And one of the reporters said, "Oh, well, that's the turkeys. And by the way, this town we're going to where the mayor won't ride for you, that's his company." My father said, "Oh, so they do turkeys in Turlock?" And the guy said, "Yeah." And my father said Kennedy took a little notebook out, and he made a few notes, and put it back in his pocket, and that was the end of it. Now, basically, every time the train stopped, Kennedy gave more or less the same speech. But my dad said each time he would stop, he would make just little bitty changes to it. So in Modesto, he talked about his main speech, but he added a couple extra things. And he said the change that he made when he got to Turlock was he put turkeys in there. Okay? And the effect of that was, and this is the takeaway for all of you, was he took a speech and he tailored it like a suit to fit the particular audience he was talking to. And they loved it. Even the people who didn't like him loved him. Now, he went on to win the California primary. And that night, he was assassinated in Los Angeles, and he died. Which was not so cool, obviously. That was the only time I ever saw my father cry. Okay? But Kennedy's example inspired me. It took a lot of courage to stand up with Cesar Chavez, and it showed a lot of political skill to make a speech that would be for any audience. Right? And that's something that anybody can do, by the way, if you have the heart and the mind for it. And he's definitely someone who inspired me. I think I've gone on much longer than I'm supposed to. Is there?
Yeah, I think we can wrap up. I know that they have to get to their 6th period, but we're actually right on time. Does anybody else have any last questions? And then we can probably stick around a tad bit. Anyone else have any last questions? You have something, Juan?
So you're trying to say that Kennedy kind of like make people like him by doing the joke about turkey?
Well, not quite that. What I meant was, he said, I'm going to have a different audience in Turlock than I had in Modesto or Stockton or Fresno or Merced or any of the Little Valley cities. So he said, I'm going to give my basic speech, but then he just threw in a little extra story about poultry, turkeys, that made that audience feel as if the whole speech was just for them. See?
You got that video?
Pardon me?
You got the video?
Unfortunately, this is before there was video, but I did. Well, I'll leave this with your teacher. Here's a picture. It's 1968. This is the cover's from this picture. This is from the hometown newspaper. You can't quite see it, but on the cover of the book you can see it. That's my younger brother John. He's sitting on my older brother's shoulders, and I'm standing in front of them. And my dad is standing behind Kennedy. That's where we got the picture from. Okay?